Hello, bedtime thinkers, and welcome to the Bedtime Discoveries. I am so glad you are here with me tonight. Together, let's take a calm journey through the story of life itself, from the tiniest microbes to the great mammals of today. Life's story has been one of patience, growth, and wonder. Tonight, we will drift slowly through time and uncover how something so small became something as vast as us. Before we begin, I would love to know where in the world you are listening from and what time of night or day it is for you right now. You can leave me a gentle note in the comments below. And while you are here, if you enjoy these calming journeys, please softly tap the like button and subscribe to the Bedtime Discoveries so you never miss another peaceful story. Imagine with me a world 4 billion years ago where the earth was young and everything was still finding its place. There were no trees yet, no animals walking, no birds flying through the skies. Instead, the surface was a restless ocean, waves rolling gently under a dim young sun. The land was mostly barren rock, bare quiet, with only the sound of water and wind. And in that vast emptiness, something extraordinary began. Life, tiny, fragile, invisible life, took its very first breath. But this was not life as we know it today, not yet mammals or even plants. It began with something much smaller, microscopic, so small it could not be seen with the naked eye. These earliest forms were microbes, simple single-celled beings, drifting in the oceans, nestled in warm pools, or clinging to rocks near volcanic vents. Scientists believe that life may have first sparked in places where heat and minerals bubbled up from the deep earth below. Hydrothermal vents, those mysterious underwater chimneys, could have been the cradles of existence. Inside their mineral walls, tiny chemical reactions may have given rise to the first self-replicating molecules. It is humbling to imagine that from those silent chemical dances, all of life began. Not grand, not dramatic, but quiet, subtle, almost hidden, invisible beginnings that carried within them the seed of everything yet to come. Think of it like this. Each tiny microbe was like a note in a vast song, a song that would take billions of years to unfold fully. Yet, even the very first note was beautiful. Pause for a moment and picture the scene in your mind. The vast, empty ocean, the soft glow of a young sun, and somewhere in a shallow tide pool or a steaming vent deep below, tiny bubbles forming, tiny molecules joining, until something new appeared, something that could copy itself, something that could survive, the first breath of life. These earliest microbes were incredibly simple. No bones, no eyes, no hearts, just soft, delicate sacs containing strands of molecules that carried information. And yet, within their simplicity, they held the greatest mystery of all, the ability to persist and to change. They fed on the chemicals around them, drawing energy from minerals or heat, sometimes even from sunlight. They were survivors, adapted to a world that was harsh, with strong radiation from the sky and violent storms rolling across the seas. But still, they endured. One can almost imagine the first division of a cell, a tiny bubble of life, stretching, pulling apart, until there were two cells, two sparks, two beginnings, where once there was only one. And slowly with time, those sparks multiplied, tens, then hundreds, then countless numbers, drifting gently in the seas. Even today, we can see echoes of them. Modern microbes, bacteria and archaea, are their descendants, still living, still thriving, in hot springs, in oceans, even inside our own bodies. It is almost as though these invisible ancestors never left. They simply kept multiplying and diversifying until life's canvas was painted with endless shapes and colors. When you look up at the stars, you may wonder whether life exists elsewhere, and if it does, perhaps it began the same way, not with grand creatures, but with the smallest, most humble sparks, invisible beginnings that quietly wrote the first lines of the universe's story of life. What makes these beginnings so extraordinary is not only their survival, but their potential. Inside those tiny cells was the ability to adapt, to evolve, to become something more. For millions of years, they remained small, invisible, filling the oceans like clouds of dust. But slowly, change was taking place. Each time a cell divided, there was a chance for variation. Tiny differences, barely noticeable at first, but enough to open new possibilities. One cell might survive heat better. Another might find energy more efficiently. Little by little, these differences added up, and in the vast oceans, diversity was born. From these first differences came resilience. If one group perished, another survived. If the environment changed, life found a way. It is almost like watching an artist sketching the first faint outlines before the full picture appears. The invisible beginnings were those outlines, quiet, tentative, yet filled with promise. And perhaps the most magical thought of all is that we ourselves carry a connection to them. Inside every one of our cells are tiny structures, mitochondria, that once were free-living microbes. Billions of years later, they still breathe for us, turning food into energy, keeping us alive, moment after moment. So, tonight, as you rest, you can imagine your body as a living museum, carrying within it the legacy of those first invisible beginnings. Their story is your story. The quiet spark that started so long ago is still glowing here in you. Close your eyes and imagine something so small that you could never see it unaided. No magnifying glass, no telescope, only a microscope could reveal it. And yet inside that tiny space is a whole world of wonder. A single cell, so delicate, so fragile, yet so powerful. It is like a universe contained in a droplet. Its thin membrane is not just a wall, but a guardian, carefully choosing what to let in and what to keep out. Inside there's fluid, a gentle ocean of life, where countless molecules drift and move, each one with a task, each one with meaning. Think of the nucleus, the quiet library of the cell, where information is stored in long, winding strands of DNA. This DNA is like a storybook with chapters that describe how to build and sustain life. Each instruction, each coded message is carefully read, copied, and carried out so that the cell may live. And then, scattered throughout the cytoplasm, are little factories, ribosomes, turning those genetic instructions into proteins, into tools, into structures. These proteins are the workers, the builders, the defenders. They give the cell its strength, its ability to move, to grow, to divide. What is most beautiful is that a single cell contains everything it needs to exist on its own. It is not merely alive, it is self-sufficient. It can take an energy, convert it into fuel, heal itself when wounded, and even create a copy of itself. The power of single cells is not in their size, but in their completeness. Imagine a house that can repair itself when damaged, produce its own food, and even split into two identical houses, each one fully functional. That is what a single cell can do. When life was young, it was only single cells that existed, and yet they thrived. They filled oceans, covered rocks, floated in the air. They survived in boiling hot springs and in freezing ice. They adapted to every condition, and they still do today. In truth, we live in a world ruled by single cells. Even now, billions of them live inside you and all around you. They are unseen companions, and their power is immeasurable. Let us wander deeper into this hidden world. The strength of single cells is not just in what they are, but in how they endure. For billions of years, they were the only life on Earth. The planet changed around them. Oceans cooled, continents shifted, asteroids struck, and climates swung from hot to frozen. Yet the single cells persisted. Some learned to eat sulfur at volcanic vents. Some learned to harvest sunlight, turning energy from the sky into the fuel of life. Others burrowed into rocks or hid beneath layers of ice. Everywhere humans later searched, from the highest peaks to the deepest seas, single cells were already there, waiting patiently. And they did more than survive. They transformed the earth. Photosynthetic microbes slowly filled the air with oxygen. Other microbes cycled nitrogen and carbon, balancing the chemistry of the planet. Without them, the air we breathe, the soil beneath our feet, the oceans we sail upon would not be the same. To this day, their legacy continues. In every forest, every desert, every breath of wind, microbes are at work. They recycle the fallen leaves. They break down stone into soil. They keep the invisible threads of ecosystems tied together. Think of the human body. It too is a community of countless single cells. But also, inside us dwell trillions of microbes. Bacteria in the gut help us digest our food. Microbes on our skin protect us from harm. We are not separate from them. We are shaped by them, woven together in one tapestry. It is a humbling thought that something so small, so often overlooked, holds such enormous influence. A drop of water may contain more living cells than there are people on Earth, and within each one is a story of survival, a spark of continuity, stretching back to the dawn of time. The power of single cells is not only their strength, but their patience. They remind us that life does not need to be large to be enduring. Sometimes the smallest are the most eternal. Now let us reflect on what single cells truly mean for everything that came after. Every plant, every animal, every human began as a single cell. At conception, there is only one, a fertilized egg, tiny, delicate, and yet carrying within it the full instructions for an entire being. From one come many. Through division and growth, that one cell becomes two, then four, then eight, and soon a cluster, and eventually a body. But the essence, the instructions, are the same, all within that first single cell. This is the greatest power of the smallest form of life. It contains the blueprint, the map, the silent code that can unfold into forests, birds, whales, and even us. Scientists sometimes describe cells as the fundamental units of life, but perhaps it is better to call them the storytellers of life, because each one carries the memory of the past and the promise of the future. Inside us right now, our cells are still dividing, still renewing, still following the same quiet rhythm that began billions of years ago. The cycle has never stopped. And here is something even more wondrous. In our cells, we carry mitochondria, tiny energy makers that were once independent microbes. Long ago, two single cells formed a partnership, one engulfing the other, not as prey, but as friend. Together, they were stronger, and together, they thrived. That partnership lives on in every breath we take. So tonight, when you think of life's grand story, remember that it is written not in vast events alone, but in the whispers of the smallest. The power of single cells is the power of life itself. It is the seed from which everything grows. Every step you take, every thought you think, every beat of your heart is a continuation of their story. The invisible has always been the most powerful. Picture with me a quiet ocean world. Billions of years ago, the earth is still young, its skies heavy with clouds, its waters dark and restless. Within those waters, life is already stirring. Tiny single cells, the first microbes, have learned how to live alone. Each one carries its own secrets, its own tiny universe, inside its delicate walls. But soon, something remarkable begins to happen. Cells begin to notice that life is gentler when it is shared. Instead of floating alone, they drift closer to one another, not by chance, but with purpose. Imagine one microbe excreting a molecule, something that another nearby cell can use. In return, the second cell releases something of its own that nourishes the first. A silent exchange, a trade without words, but filled with meaning. This is the beginning of community. Microbes form mats, thin layers on rocks by the sea. They cluster around vents, drawing warmth together. They arrange themselves into colonies, sheets of living fabric, woven cell by cell. In these colonies, life finds stability. A single cell can be fragile, easily washed away, easily destroyed. But together, they are stronger. They can resist currents, share resources, and even protect one another. Think of a single candle flame, how easily it is blown out. But gather many candles together, and the light becomes steady, enduring. That is what microbes discovered, and that is how life learned the strength of togetherness. As time passed, these gatherings grew more complex. It was no longer just about being near, but about communicating. Even the simplest cells can send messages. They release tiny chemical signals, like whispers drifting through water. Other cells receive them and respond. In this way, the community begins to act like a single body. Scientists call this quorum sensing. It means that cells can sense how many others are nearby. When enough of them gather, they change their behavior. They might all begin to glow like fireflies of the sea, or they might all produce slime to build a protective shield, or they might release toxins to defend themselves together. This is not random. It is cooperation. Each cell knows that alone it is weak, but as part of a greater whole, it can achieve the impossible. Some microbial mats grew into structures called stromatolites, layer upon layer, built over time, until great rocky formations rose in shallow seas. They were alive, monuments to the power of microbial teamwork. And astonishingly, some stromatolites still exist today, ancient communities of microbes that have persisted for billions of years. When you look at them, you are not just seeing stone, you are seeing living history, fossil and life intertwined, proof that the earliest communities were not only successful, but enduring. And as these communities thrived, they began to shape the very world around them. They released oxygen, changing the chemistry of the seas, and eventually the air. They formed the first ecosystems, little pockets of interdependence, where each microbe had a role, and each one relied on the others. The power of single cells was great, but the power of communities was greater still. Together, they were no longer just surviving. They were building. Even now, the earth is still ruled by these unseen communities. In soil, in oceans, in our own bodies, microbes live not alone, but side by side, in vast numbers. Beneath your feet, in just one handful of soil, there are more microbes than there are stars in the Milky Way. And they are not scattered randomly. They form intricate networks, each one feeding the other, passing nutrients like gifts, and maintaining the balance of life. In the ocean, planktonic communities drift, tiny drifters that together produce most of the oxygen we breathe. They are the invisible forests of the seas, sustaining fish, whales, and even us. And within us, inside our own bodies, communities of microbes thrive. We call it the microbiome. Trillions of tiny beings living in our gut, on our skin, in our mouths. They help digest food, train our immune systems, and even influence our moods. We are not one being alone, but a collection, a walking community. A partnership between human cells and microbial ones. It is humbling to realize that we owe so much to creatures we cannot see. Their invisible conversations, their quiet exchanges make the world livable. Without them, forests could not grow, oceans could not breathe, and we ourselves could not survive. So when you think of life, do not picture only the great animals or the tall trees. Remember the smallest ones, the microbes, and their ancient, ongoing communities. They remind us that life's strength does not always lie in the individual, but in the togetherness. That cooperation is as fundamental as survival, and that even in the unseen corners, life is whispering, sharing, and enduring side by side. Let us drift back again into the deep past of our earth. Imagine a world without oxygen, no breeze of fresh air, no invisible breath to fill the lungs, for lungs did not yet exist. It was a planet ruled by gases, thick with carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrogen. The seas were dark, heavy with iron, a world strange to us now. But to microbes, it was home. For countless ages, life had survived without oxygen. Cells fed on minerals, on sulfur, on hydrogen bubbling from vents. Some lived by fermentation, breaking down molecules for a trickle of energy. The world was quiet, stable, but limited. Energy was scarce. Life was fragile, growth was slow, and then something extraordinary appeared. A new kind of microbe with a new trick. They learned to capture sunlight and use its power to split water. In doing so, they produced a byproduct, a gas, colorless, invisible, and dangerous to the life that already existed. That gas was oxygen. At first, it leaked into the oceans. It reacted with iron, turning the seas rusty red. Minerals sank to the seafloor, layer upon layer, forming banded iron rocks, which geologists still find today. Each stripe of stone, a quiet reminder of oxygen's first breath. But oxygen was not gentle. For many ancient microbes, it was poison. It burned their delicate chemistry. It damaged their fragile molecules. And so, for them, the rise of oxygen was catastrophe. Whole populations perished, driven into tiny corners of the earth, or deep underground, where oxygen could not reach. And yet, for others, oxygen was opportunity. It was energy, limitless, powerful, abundant. Those who learned to use it found a way to thrive. The age of breath had begun. The change did not come quickly. It was slow, measured in millions of years. But as the new microbes, cyanobacteria, spread through the oceans, the world was reshaped. Scientists call this turning point the Great Oxidation Event. It happened around 2.5 billion years ago, when oxygen finally began to spill not only into the oceans, but into the air itself. Imagine the sky before this time, a hazy orange, thick with methane. Then slowly, as oxygen filled the air, the haze cleared. The sky turned blue for the very first time. It must have been breathtaking to see the earth transformed. The oceans, once heavy and dark, grew clearer, lighter, as iron sank to the bottom. Landscapes glowed under a bluer sky, bathed in sunlight that was no longer dimmed. But with this change came challenges. Oxygen is a reactive gas. It sparked fires where forests would later grow. It damaged delicate cells that could not defend themselves. Life had to adapt or vanish. Some microbes retreated to oxygen-free places, deep sediments, underground caves, or the stomachs of animals. When animals would one day appear, others evolved defenses. They invented antioxidants, protective shields against oxygen's bite, and still others went further. They harnessed oxygen. They used it not as an enemy, but as fuel. This was the birth of aerobic respiration, a way of unlocking far more energy than any microbe had ever known. It was like switching from a candle to a roaring fire. With oxygen, cells could grow faster, divide quicker, and build new forms. The Great Oxidation Event was both disaster and miracle. It ended one world and began another. With oxygen in the air, the stage was set for everything yet to come. Oxygen allowed for complexity. It gave cells the energy to grow larger, to form compartments, to cooperate in new ways. It was a foundation for multicellular life. Without oxygen, there could be no plants, no animals, no mammals, no us, even the structures inside our own cells. Mitochondria are a legacy of this age. They are ancient microbes that join forces with others, bringing with them the power to breathe oxygen. To this day, they burn oxygen in our cells, turning food into energy, fueling every heartbeat, every thought, every breath. Think of the forests. Green leaves shimmering in sunlight. They breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. Think of the oceans, vast and deep, where plankton float and glow, quietly producing most of the air we breathe. All of this is a legacy of those first cyanobacteria and the rise of oxygen. And think of yourself resting now, breathing slowly, gently. Each inhale is a gift from that ancient transformation. Each exhale, a reminder of your place in life's long story. The rise of oxygen was more than a chemical change. It was the opening of a doorway into a world where life could grow vast and wondrous and endlessly varied. It is easy to forget that something invisible could have such power. But tonight, as you feel your own breath moving in and out, you carry the memory of that ancient shift. The air that sustains you is the same air that first filled the skies billions of years ago. And so, the invisible became essential, and the quiet rise of oxygen became the heartbeat of life's future. For billions of years, life on Earth was simple. It lived as single cells, tiny, delicate, floating in the oceans. They carried within them all that was needed to live. A cell could move, it could eat, it could divide, and when it divided, it became two. It was a quiet rhythm, a cycle repeated countless times for endless ages. And yet, there were limits. A single cell could only grow so large. It could only do so much. And though it was a miracle of chemistry, its world was small. But sometimes, when conditions were right, cells began to gather. They did not merge into one, but stayed close together, clinging, cooperating. Some formed chains, others made sheets, others drifted in clusters, like beads of dew. At first, this closeness was fragile. Cells might cling for a while, then drift apart again. But slowly, over long stretches of time, something more began to happen. Some cells discovered that together, they could do things alone cells never could. Imagine one cell at the edge of a cluster taking in nutrients, while another, shielded inside, was safe from harm. Imagine a group of cells sharing signals, warning each other of danger. Together, they had strength. Together, they had possibilities. It was the beginning of a quiet revolution, the first steps toward multicellularity. As clusters of cells grew more stable, a new challenge appeared. How could so many individuals, live as one, how could they avoid conflict and find harmony? The answer was cooperation. Some cells took on special roles. One might help with movement, another with feeding, another with reproduction. This was division of labor, and it changed everything. Consider the green algae of ancient seas. Some began to form colonies, where not every cell was the same. A few gave up the ability to reproduce, devoting themselves instead to helping the colony survive. Others became specialized for passing on life, ensuring the future. This was sacrifice and trust. A single cell could no longer live alone. It depended on the group, and the group depended on it. In these moments, we can glimpse the origins of every complex being alive today. For every plant, every animal, every human is a community of cells, each with a role, each working for the whole. Even now, our own bodies whisper this history. Skin cells protect us. Muscle cells move us. Nerve cells carry thought, each one a descendant of that ancient decision to live together, to share, to specialize. But the leap was not easy. It required trust and new ways of communicating. Cells had to invent signals, tiny chemical messages that could flow between them. They had to build connections, sticky surfaces, molecular bridges, so that the group would not fall apart. Over millions of years, these bonds grew stronger, and slowly, clusters of cells became organisms, not just gatherings, but true living unities. Once the leap was made, a whole new world of possibilities opened. Multicellular life could grow larger, stretch wider, move with more power. It could form tissues, organs, and eventually entire bodies. In the oceans, strange new forms began to appear. Soft-bodied creatures, simple but larger than any single cell. They absorbed food. They drifted with the currents. They carved out new ways of living. The world began to fill with experiments in form. Some groups of cells built simple spheres. Others wove themselves into filaments. Still others flattened into sheets. Nature was trying out possibilities, reaching, testing, exploring. Multicellularity was not a single invention. It was discovered again and again by many different lineages, in plants, in fungi, in animals, in algae. Separate groups of life all found their way to living as many instead of one. This was a profound shift. For the first time, life had the tools to become complex. It could grow forests of green, reefs of coral, and bodies that could move, sense, and think. The leap to multicellularity was not quick. It was slow, gentle, measured in millions upon millions of years. But it was a leap all the same, a step across a threshold. From this point onward, the story of life would never be the same. And so, as you drift here, listening softly, imagine those ancient seas filled with tiny cells, learning to trust one another, learning to live not as one, but as many. Out of that simple choice to stay together came every leaf, every bird, every mammal, and every dreamer, resting now in the long flow of life story. For a long time, the oceans were filled only with microbes and clusters of cells learning to live together. But then slowly, gently, life began to take on new forms. These were first animals, simple, soft-bodied, with no bones, no shells, no complicated organs. They were fragile, yet remarkable, for in them was something new. Imagine a sponge, its body made of many tiny pores. It does not chase food, nor hunt. It simply draws water through itself, sifting nutrients gently like a living filter. So still, so quiet, and yet so alive. Or picture a jelly-like creature floating freely, pulsing softly with water. It drifts with the current, sometimes glowing faintly, sometimes stinging when touched. It does not think, it does not plan, but it feels. For the first time, cells had formed nerves, tiny threads that could sense light, or touch, or danger. This was something profound. For the first time, life could respond. It could feel the world around it and act. The first animals were small, delicate, and unassuming, but their gift was movement and sensation. They showed what life could become when cells worked not only to survive, but to experience. The ancient seas were like a vast laboratory. Every creature that appeared was an experiment, a new idea tested by time. One group formed flat, ribbon-like bodies, sliding gently along the ocean floor. These may have been the ancestors of worms and more complex creatures to come. Another group grew tentacles to catch drifting food, bringing it into a central mouth. Others learned to attach themselves to rocks, waiting for food to drift their way. None of these creatures were large. Most were tiny, barely noticed against the waves of sand. And yet, their presence marked a turning point. Some creatures developed simple muscles, allowing them to bend, to contract, to move in slow pulses. Others refined their nerve cells, creating networks that carried signals from one end of the body to the other. For the first time, life had something like a nervous system. Think of that. Before this moment, the earth was silent, a sensation. No touch, no sight, no sound, only the quiet chemistry of single cells. But now, an animal could feel a brush of water and respond. It could sense light and swim toward it. The world was opening to experience. And with each new experiment, the ocean grew richer. Where once there was only drifting microbes, there were now bodies, structures, and the beginnings of behavior. It was still a slow story. Millions of years passed, with these gentle creatures filling the seas, but every tiny step was laying the foundation for the creatures yet to come. When we look at these first simple animals, it is easy to see them as primitive, and yet they were pioneers. The sponge taught life to build bodies with specialized cells working together. The jellyfish showed the power of nerves and muscles, however faint. The flatworms whispered of a body with direction, a front and a back, a head and a tail. Each one, though simple, held within it the seeds of complexity. They were quiet messengers of the future. Even today, they remain with us. Sponges still filter the seas. Jellyfish still drift in silent beauty. Worms still burrow beneath sand and soil. They are living reminders that the path from simple to complex is not about leaving the past behind, but carrying it forward. And when you close your eyes, you might imagine the ancient oceans glowing softly with these first fragile creatures. They were not mighty. They were not fast, but they were first. They opened the doorway through which all animals would one day pass. From their stillness came movement. From their simplicity came sensation. From their fragility came resilience. The first simple animals were like the dawn light before sunrise, quiet, gentle, promising. And from their dawn, the great story of animals had begun. The oceans have always been Earth's greatest stage. It was here that life began, and here that it experimented endlessly with new shapes, new movements, and new possibilities. After the first simple animals appeared, the seas became crowded with life. Not crowded in the way we imagine today, with whales and fishes and coral reefs, but crowded with gentle experiments. Small bodies, each different, each trying out a new way to live. Some grew hard shells, thin at first, like delicate coats of armor. These shells offer protection from waves, from predators, from the harsh salt of the sea. Others learned to burrow, to hide beneath sand and mud, waiting safely out of sight. There were creatures that floated, open to the currents, drifting wherever the sea carried them. and there were others that clung tightly to rocks, to corals, to ancient seaweed stalks, anchored, yet alive. This was a time of vast experimentation. Nature seemed to be asking what is possible, what shape could a body take, what ways could life endure. It was a long, slow dance, played out across millions of years. Each success was kept, each failure faded away, and little by little, the oceans filled with wonder. Among the most important experiments were the inventions of protection, perception, and motion. Some creatures grew stronger shells, thick layered, like shields carried upon their backs. These shells told a story of danger, for where some creatures sought defense, others sought attack. Predation had begun. Some animals learned to bite, to grasp, to consume other creatures whole. And so, for the first time, life began to hunt life. It was a frightening, yet transformative step. To survive, others developed new skills. Some learned to swim more swiftly, to escape danger. Some grew spines and bristles, making themselves hard to swallow. And some invented something extraordinary, the gift of sight. Eyes, even in their simplest forms, changed the game forever. At first, they were no more than patches, able to tell light from dark, but even that was enough to know which way was up, to sense the shadow of a predator. As eyes grew more complex, animals could see shapes, and then movement, and eventually details of the world. Now, for the first time, life could look upon life. Hunter and prey, locked in a quiet, endless cycle. The oceans became a theater of motion, of chase, of flight. Creatures that once drifted passively were now forced to choose. Hide, fight, or run. And yet, within the struggle was creativity. For every new weapon, nature devised a shield. For every new predator, a prey found a way to endure. And so, diversity bloomed. These ancient experiments were not just fleeting trials. They became the blueprint for everything that would come later. From the oceans came the first segmented bodies, creatures built like chains with repeating units. From them would one day arise insects, spiders, crabs, and 1,000 other forms. From the oceans came the first backbones, simple rods of support that gave body strength and shape. From these would grow the great vertebrates, the fishes, the reptiles, the mammals, and us. Even delicate experiments like the first fins, the first gills, the first jaws were rehearsals. Nature was sketching possibilities, testing, revising, and refining. We often think of evolution as a straight path, but the oceans remind us it was more like an artist's sketchbook. Many drawings were tried, some abandoned, some redrawn into something new. When we look back now into those ancient seas, we see not chaos, but creativity, a slow, patient artistry guided by time itself. And though so many of those early creatures are gone, their legacy remains. Every heartbeat, every breath, every step we take is built upon the experiments of the sea. So as you rest tonight, you might imagine the vast, quiet waters filled with shapes both strange and familiar. Creatures drifting, crawling, swimming, all part of life's great rehearsal. And know that without their trials, without their experiments, we would never be here to dream beneath the stars. For countless ages, Life had known only the oceans. The waves were home. The currents were pathways. The salt water was safety. Every creature, from the tiniest microbe to the first animals with eyes and shells, had lived surrounded by water. But slowly, softly, something began to change. The land, silent, barren, rocky, began to call, and life answered. At first, it was not animals, but plants and algae that made the journey. Tiny green pioneers, creeping up along shorelines, clinging to damp stones, gathering sunlight. They could not stray far, for they needed water to survive. But their presence began to soften the harshness of land. The rocks, once bare, were now dressed in green films. In moss-like growths, these early colonizers began the long work of transforming Earth's surface. They held the soil, they created shade, they opened the door for others. Soon after, the first fungi joined them, quiet partners in survival. Together, plants and fungi built tiny ecosystems, fragile gardens at the edge of the sea. It was still dangerous. Dry winds, harsh sunlight, and the absence of constant water all threatened life. But with each passing age, life grew bolder. These earliest steps onto land were like whispers, soft, hesitant, yet filled with promise. The ocean was no longer the only home. A new world was waiting. After plants had softened the land, animals began to explore. At first, they were small creatures like arthropods, with jointed legs and hard shells, perhaps millipede-like beings, crawling among the damp mosses, perhaps ancient scorpions, venturing briefly from tidal pools. These were the first steps of animal life, onto dry earth. Their bodies carried water within them, a little ocean locked inside to keep them alive. And so they wandered carefully, slowly, learning to breathe new air. Not long after, amphibious creatures appeared, fish-like beings with fins that had become sturdy enough to push against the ground. Some could pull themselves from the shallows onto muddy banks. They rested there, basking in the sun, lungs slowly replacing gills. These were the ancestors of frogs, of salamanders, and eventually of reptiles and mammals. They were fragile, yet bold. Each movement onto land was an experiment, a test of survival. Imagine the scene: a shallow lagoon, its water warm and still. A strange fish lifts itself on jointed fins, hauling its body onto the mud. It gulps at the air, its sides heaving, then slides back into the water. Back and forth it goes, learning, testing, until one day it stays. The journey onto land was not quick. It was not a single leap. It was a million tiny crawls, a million experiments, each one carrying life farther from the sea. And slowly, a new world filled with plants, with insects, with amphibians, began to emerge. Once life had found its way onto land, the earth was forever changed. Forests began to spread, green and tall, turning bare landscapes into lush homes. The air grew richer in oxygen, filling the skies with breath. Insects grew large, with wings beating over ferns and swamps. Amphibians thrived near the water's edge, their calls echoing into the stillness of night. But there were challenges, too. Dryness forced animals to adapt, to carry water within eggs, to protect themselves from the sun. Some learned to lay tough-shelled eggs on land. A brilliant solution. These were the reptiles, creatures who no longer depended on water to reproduce. Their success opened the door to a new era. And so, from damp forests and ancient swamps, arose a world teeming with diversity. The seas still held life, but the land had become alive too. From those first fragile plants on stone, to the bold amphibians and reptiles, the journey onto land was one of courage. It required leaving behind the comfort of the sea to face a harsher but wider world. Even now, we carry the memory of that journey. The salt in our blood, the way our bodies thirst for water, the rhythm of our breath, all remind us that we once lived only in the sea. But tonight, as you rest, you can imagine those ancient shores, soft green mosses, shallow lagoons, and the first brave footsteps pressing into wet sand. It was here that the ocean gave birth to the land. It was here that life expanded its home. And it was here that the next great chapters of Earth's story were written. Long ago, the Earth was ruled by giants, dinosaurs, tall, powerful, and unchallenged, roamed the forests, plains, and swamps. For millions of years, they were the rulers of the land. And yet, in the shadows, small creatures lived, tiny, warm-blooded, covered in soft fur, quiet, cautious. They crept through the undergrowth at night. These were the first mammals. They were not mighty hunters, nor rulers of their age. Instead, they were survivors. They lived in burrows, hid in darkness, and scavenged what they could. In a world of towering dinosaurs, they seemed insignificant. But then a great change came. A fiery impact from the skies. An asteroid struck the Earth. The world darkened. Forests burned, and the giants fell. The dinosaurs, once invincible, could not endure. And in the quiet that followed, the small ones, the mammals, began to rise. From hidden burrows, from secret forests, they emerged to inherit the earth. This was the dawn of the age of mammals, an age not of towering reptiles, but of warmth, care, and adaptability, an age that would, in time, lead to us. Mammals were different from all who came before. Their strength was not in size, but in their special gifts. The first gift was warmth. Unlike reptiles, mammals carried their own heat within them. Even in the cold of night, even in the chill of winter, their bodies stayed warm. This allowed them to live in places too harsh for others. They could explore forests, mountains, tundras, and survive. The second gift was care. Mothers fed their young with milk, nourishing them, protecting them, until they were strong enough to live. This bond of care created a new way of surviving. The young were not left to fend for themselves, but grew under protection, with time to learn and adapt. The third gift was curiosity. Mammals became explorers, with sharp senses, flexible bodies, and clever minds. Some climbed trees, some ran across plains, some returned to the seas, where whales and dolphins would one day flourish. Each experiment, each adaptation, helped mammals spread across the world. Tiny shrews, graceful deer, powerful bears, endless forms, all found their place. But perhaps the greatest gift was the mind. In some mammals, brains grew larger, thoughts grew deeper, social groups formed, communication blossomed, and memory stretched across generations. It was not strength alone, nor speed, but the quiet power of connection and thought that shaped the future of mammals. As the age of mammals unfolded, the earth grew alive with diversity. Forests echoed with the calls of primates, creatures with nimble hands, sharp eyes, and minds that could solve puzzles. On the plains, herds of grazing mammals thundered, followed by swift hunters, whose teeth and claws kept balance in the world. And in the oceans, giant whales sang, filling the deep with music. Among these many mammals, one lineage would take a remarkable path, from small, tree-dwelling primates to upright walkers of grasslands, to tool makers, to storytellers. These were humans, dreamers who built fires, who painted caves, who gazed at stars. But humans were not separate. They were part of the same story. Every bone, every heartbeat, every breath was shaped by the same gifts of warmth, of care, of curiosity. And even now, though we build cities and send ships into space, we are still mammals. We still seek warmth on cold nights. We still nurture our young. We still wonder, explore, and dream. The age of mammals was not just the rise of creatures with fur and milk. It was the rise of adaptability, of families, of intelligence. It was a flowering of life in countless forms. And tonight, as you rest, you carry that story within you. You are part of the mammalian age, part of its triumphs, its resilience, its endless experiments. From the first tiny survivors, to the great elephants, to the quiet deer, to the human heart listening now. This is a story of warmth and wonder, since the very first invisible spark of life, to the warm-blooded creatures of today. A single thread has been weaving through time. It is delicate and yet unbreakable. It stretches from the tiniest microbes to the vast elephants, the singing whales, and to us, listening here tonight. Imagine it, billions of years ago, when the earth was young, there were no trees, no birds, no mammals, only seas of tiny, simple cells, floating, dividing, gently experimenting with existence. They seemed so small, so fragile, yet from them a story began. They built communities. They learned to breathe oxygen. They found strength in joining together. Each step, slow, patient, a whisper in deep time. From those whispers came the first simple animals, jelly-like creatures, strange forms in ancient oceans. They left fossils behind, like delicate imprints in stone, silent messages from another age. And then creatures ventured onto land. Lungs replaced gills, legs replaced fins, forests rose, insects buzzed, reptiles ruled. But time is ever turning, and even the greatest fall. When the dinosaurs vanished, a new melody began. The mammals stepped forward, bringing warmth, care, and curiosity. The thread of life grew stronger still, and now that same thread runs quietly through us, through your breath, through your heartbeat, through your dreams. The story of life has never ended. It flows on from then to now. Among the mammals, a new kind of storyteller emerged. The humans, they stood upright, their hands free to shape tools, their voices free to share thoughts. They looked at fire and saw not only warmth, but possibility. They looked at the stars and saw not only light, but questions. They looked at each other and saw family, community, love. From caves to villages, from villages to cities, the story of humans unfolded. They painted on stone walls, telling tales of animals, of hunts, of spirits. They built monuments, carved by patience, by vision, by hands reaching beyond survival. And always they wondered, why are we here? What came before us? Where will we go? Even now, those questions linger. Science, philosophy, dreams, all are echoes of the same curiosity that once drove tiny mammals to peek out from their burrows, and the same curiosity that led microbes to explore the possibilities of life. In every discovery, in every story, in every dream, we carry the past within us. We are not apart from history. We are history. Every breath is borrowed from that ancient thread of life. And so, from the first invisible beginnings to the vast complexity of now, life has traveled an endless road. It has stumbled, it has flourished, it has adapted, always moving forward. You, listening tonight, are part of this road, part of the microbes, the mammals, the humans, your cells, your heartbeat, your breath are all chapters of the same ancient book. When you look at your hands, you see not only flesh and bone, but the echoes of fins, of wings, of countless ancestors. When you look at the night sky, you see not only stars, but the same mystery that called to early humans. And to every dreamer before you, the journey is not finished. It continues with you, with us, with those yet to come. And now, as you close your eyes, let the story settle softly within you. From microbes to mammals to this quiet moment, you are carried by the great thread of life. Rest gently, knowing you belong to something vast and timeless. You are part of the story, and the story is part of you. So sleep well, sleep deeply, and let the ages drift through your dreams. Good night and goodbye.